Hello, everybody. Happy Friday morning and welcome to the Keiser Education Series. My name is Gabe Derman and I'm a human performance and education specialist at Keiser. I'll be moderating today's panel alongside my teammate, Mike Compton. Today's discussion is centered around the topic of long-term athletic development. In today's youth sports model, there is a philosophical tug of war happening, pulling some athletes in the direction of early sports specialization and intensive travel teams versus multi-sport encouragement and practitioners that value a commitment to long-term athletic development. Our two panelists joining us today are leaders in the field of long-term athletic development and are committed to the betterment of the youth sports athletic model. Our first panelist is Jeremy Frisch. Jeremy is the owner and director of Achieve Performance Training in Clinton, Massachusetts. He's a former strength conditioning coach at Holy Cross, working directly with men's basketball, as well as a number of other Crusader athletic programs. His various experiences include serving as a sports performance director at Teamwork Sports Center, the speed and strength coach for Athletes Edge Sports Training, and completing a strength conditioning internship at Stanford University. He's a health and science graduate of Worcester State College, where he competed as a member of the football and track programs. Our second panelist is Lee Taft. He's the founder and owner of Lee Taft Athletic Consulting and is highly respected as one of the top athletic movement specialists in the world. In the last 30 years, he has devoted the majority of his time training multi-directional speed to all ages and abilities, as well as top performance coaches and fitness professionals globally. He has spoken at countless strength conditioning and sports performance events and has produced a number of instructional videos, ebooks, and courses in the area of multi-directional speed and movement training. My first Lee Taft in-person exposure was in Fleurville, just north of Austin. For you remember that, Lee?
Yeah,
for Red Line. That's right, Red Line Athletics. With D. Mabe, and I enjoyed that one so much, and I can remember it so vividly. It feels like not that long ago. So cool to be back here with you today.
That was fun. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So before we begin, for more info on Jeremy, you can visit achieveperformance.training, and for more info on Lee, you can visit leetaft.com. We'll be sure to include both of their social medias at the end and in the published episode. So, all right, Jeremy and Lee, thank you for both being here with us on Friday morning. Jeremy, I'll start with you. How are things going in Massachusetts? What is the schedule at Achieve Performance looking like right now?
Well, it's almost end of fall sports season, so we're going to be kicking into the winter. So all the young kids that were playing flag football or fall baseball and all that stuff, they're all going to be joining our whether it's our athletic development program or our younger kids speed demons program. We'll have those athletes coming in, as well as our high school athletes just getting finished with football, soccer, things like that. Those athletes will be starting up pretty soon. So it's kind of like once Thanksgiving Day football game is over, that Monday we start getting plenty of kids trickling in to our to the gym. And I probably started my younger kids program probably 2 weeks ago. So it seems like every day I got a new kid joining us. So that class is pretty fluid. So a kid can jump in almost any time, and just it's really about, hey, here, go do this, go do that. Let's try this, let's try that. And so that pretty much from now until Little League starts, we'll be going all out every day with our youth programs.
All right, good to hear. And Lee, basketball season is here and rolling. I know you're heavily involved in hoops. What have you been busy with?
Yep. So I took over a boys high school basketball program here pretty close to where we live. And part of the reason I got involved was because, we throw this word culture around a lot, but because I wanted to see a better culture. I wanted the boys to understand what it's like to be committed and what commitment means actually, and what responsibility to somebody else aside from yourself means. And we're having growing pains because of that. But any program I've ever coached, we usually say it takes by the third year, because you got to get people through the program. You got to get parents to understand when their little baby gets yelled at and gets told you can't play tonight because you skipped practice, or you're no longer on the program because you didn't tell anything, things like that. So that's what we're dealing with now. But we're also trying to teach them a lot about athleticism and how we develop better as a human being, like physically and stuff, not just the skills of basketball, which is obviously critical at the high school level, but got to be an athlete as well. So we're having fun with that. So yeah, it's been good.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear it and happy to have the both of you on. Thanks for making the time. So we'll get right to it. And we're going to begin with Jeremy here. How do you define long-term athletic development, and why is it important?
You know what? In my view of long-term athletic development is so funny. I was going to post something like this. I probably read your question the other day, and then it was like stuck in my head, and I was going to like post something about it like on Twitter, and I realized that you had written me this exact question. But for me, it's just long-term athletic development is being able to provide the athlete the right environment at the right time. That's kind of really where I kind of the way I look at youth athletic development and long-term athletic development. Like, I sort of try to do all the body weight training and all the stuff that you probably see me do on Twitter with the young kids. I try to do that stuff as long as I can with those athletes, and then make this slow transition to more organized in weight room type training. Obviously, strength training is great for children, but I think that there's a big piece missing, like the phys ed type stuff, the crawling and the climbing and the parkour and the wrestling and the gymnastics. I think there's some coaches that read research that say like, oh, strength training is great for kids, and they're in a rush to put a barbell in their hands right away. When the reality is there's so many other things that you can do that are way more integrated when they're younger. So the way I look at it is like, I want the kids to do the right things at the right time. And as the kids get older and they change and they get more mature, then you can add in more organized type training, because they're really going to do that type of stuff for the rest of their life. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I look at long-term athletic development, is really just providing a young athlete with the right environment at the right time.
Yeah, we're excited to learn a little bit more too about like how you got to that type of training. And obviously, if anyone's followed Jeremy on social media, like you've definitely seen a lot of that crawling and a lot of fun environments that he's been able to put young athletes in, and athletes of all types. So we're excited to learn a little bit more about that. But I think that's the first time I've heard a definition like that, and I really like that one. So thanks for sharing that. And Lee, how about yourself? How would you define long-term athletic development, and why is it important?
Yeah, first of all, it's hard to add to what Jeremy just said, because that's really the nuts and bolts of it. And and one thing I've always liked about what Jeremy does, whether he does it intentionally or just it's intuitive for him, is he's a master at developing coordination in kids, and coordination is the foundation of long-term athletic development. That's what allows us to do the more advanced type of skills and the different types of training that we might want to do. So that's really important. But I also think that's what we are as humans, is we don't go from birth to shooting a jump shot in a week, right? We have long-term development, whether it's athletic or human development. So I was fortunate enough to grow up at a really, really cool time, during the 70s, where we did a ton. Jeremy mentioned gymnastics. Like my dad, who was a phys ed teacher forever, was huge in teaching us gymnastics and stuff. And so we did that. We did climbing. We did a lot. That was phys ed. That was a lot of what we did. There was never a rush. I was fortunate enough to play 4 sports in high school because we could. At the school I was at, all my friends did. We played, and it was just, you moved from one sport to the next, You never worried about, just quick results. It was just like, hey, we play next year and we play next season. You just keep moving along the process. And then all of a sudden things started to change, and I'm sure we'll dive into that stuff. But long-term athletic development is what we are. That's what we do. If we allow the process to occur and we just feed it, that's what we should be doing anyway. That's normal. That's like learning. It's not quick learning in school of math. It's a long-term development of the process of learning math. Athleticism is no different.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, at least for me growing up, a lot of my Sunday mornings were going to gymnastics, and it seemed like anecdotally that kind of disappeared with a lot of kids. But I still work with a lot of parents now and younger kids in the Chicagoland area, and I'm definitely starting to see that reappear for sure.
Yeah. Well, also, and not to keep it going, but what happened to teaching throwing, kicking with each arm as a young person? That's a developmental skill set. It isn't a specific skill set, right? That's eventually, if I'm going to be a pitcher, yeah, I got to choose what arm am I going to throw with, right? I'm a righty, so it makes no sense to throw. But when you're in physical education, or you're in Jeremy's youth development program, throwing a ball at an X taped on a wall with your non-dominant hand is long-term development, because it's developing a skill set or an ability. And we just have lost that. Now we're going specifically to the high level skills, and we've skipped all these fine and gross motor developmental skills. And it's showing up too, showing up as we go. We're seeing not a diverse athlete, we're seeing a very specific athlete, and it has long-term detrimental effects.
Yeah. So Lee, going right back to you on that, what do you consider some of the common limitations of the youth sports model that innately focuses on early sports specialization? I know you've been pretty vocal about that, at least on social media and educating with the people you talk to, but things such as AU, can some of these limitations be harmful to long-term athletic development, just like you were saying?
It sure can. And we for a little bit, we got to talk outside of the athletic part of it, because emotionally, socially, certainly physically, developmental behaviors of communicating with other kids and other teammates and other peers is really important. And the specialization model puts you in a little cubicle, and you deal with that coach usually, and you deal with that group of teammates, and you deal with that skill set consistently over time. And it not only has a physical limitation for young developing bodies and young developing nervous systems that's really thirsty for adventure and solving of problems. They don't get that. And we talk about windows of opportunity and stuff like that, whatever that means. We could obviously dive deeper into that, but we miss opportunities for kids to have that physical growth by not specializing, but also the emotional growth and the mental growth of learning different challenges and learning different coaching styles, because now I have a brand new coach in my new sport this season versus staying 9-10 months with the same coach. So that in the long term, to me, is as much of the issue of burnout as we say the peak is right around 13, 14 years old. They don't make it to high school, a lot of these kids, because they just had enough. And it's not that they couldn't handle it physically anymore. Emotionally, it now becomes a chore and a job. Young kids aren't designed to decipher those stresses and those pressures. Okay, we can handle that. We know tomorrow the sun will rise. They don't. And that's why, unfortunately, we're seeing anxiety, depression, and unfortunately suicide with young kids who are being boxed up and they can't express themselves because they don't have the tools yet. So this is a lot deeper than, me being able to kick a ball, throw a ball, then hit with a tennis racket and change sports. Yeah, that's really important. It's a lot deeper than that. And until we start to get parents and coaches and young people to understand that, we're going to keep walking into this wall. We got to break the wall down and realize it's bigger than that. And that's why I said, when I grew up in the 70s, I didn't know what AAU was. I never even heard of it until I think I got to like a senior in high school. Then somebody played some AAU team. I didn't know what it was because we did everything. So yeah, so that's this could be a 5-hour conversation easily.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I like about, go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we're seeing the same thing too, like in school as well, is that we boxed in kids in the classroom all day as a student. They think that reading more classroom work is going to create a better student in the long term, not realizing that like movement is innately connected to the brain, right? And so kids learn better by being able to move around more. Even just something simple as going out for recess for 10 minutes can allow them to retain more information when they're in a classroom. But it's almost like we're specializing in school now. Like we're just trying to make the kids, good readers and good listeners and good writers, and totally forgetting that the body is part of that. The body plays a huge role in learning. So we have Mike's in my youngest is in 4th grade, and I think they have phys ed like once every 7 or 8 days. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, we had it 3 days a week at least, and on top of that, we had recess a couple of days a week. You know what I mean? So we had those breaks between between classes where we could, let off some steam, let off some anxiety. Say you had a class that you didn't like or you weren't very good at, you get to kind of let off some steam and run around and then come back in later on. And so I think those breaks are really important, not only for mentally and emotionally, but then think about, on top of that, a young kid, how much movement you actually get and how you naturally develop coordination by chasing your buddies around, being out in the playground, climbing on things. Like, so it's all connected. That's why I always say, like, all these years we spent with my kids, like when I took them to the playground every day and we did this, like those things, all obviously they had fun, but those things have turned into helping their athletic development way down the line.
Absolutely. And Longenborough University did a study on that. They had 19 countries that they studied that very thing. They reduced 25% of sit down time in a classroom and they added in movement. 18 of the 19 showed a drastic improvement. One country didn't, and it was Germany. It stayed the same, but they said they already had a lot of movement built into their day anyway. So it was proven that the kids and their academics rose drastically. And we're seeing other countries now take on that model. And I spent time at one of the top country in the world right now academically. I sat down with a principal over there and I did a workshop there, and they said, we finally understood now what learning is. And we threw out a great big fixed standards book. We made it more about the kids. It was kid centric. And that's what we're seeing now. So yeah, that's a great topic.
Yeah, I was actually in the airport yesterday. I was coming back from a trip and I should have taken a photo of it, but I was walking by one of the gates or on the way to the gate and there was a playground set up in the airport, and it was in London, it was in the UK. And there was a lot of kids playing on it. And I remember just like having a moment of stopping and looking over there. I'm like, oh, it's pretty cool that they have that. And then to have this conversation this morning, I like to hear that. So what I also really enjoyed was just the perspective for both of you, having the skills and abilities that you have on the developmental side physically, but then also a deep appreciation for the psychosocial aspect and that development and the importance of it. And Lee, you mentioned some very real issues in our country that could be, it could help to have some sort of dedication to physical development and have a real positive impact on those things. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to kick it over to Mike here for a question.
Thanks, Gabe. We're going to stick along the lines of like playing movement outside of that, being specific. And Jeremy, you touched on it a little bit during your original talk on what long-term athletic development is. A lot of your posts are, hey, with youth athletes running and jumping into mats, using different instrument devices and being allowed opportunities to problem solve in those open, shamed, chaotic environments. If you could elaborate a little bit more in detail, like how did you get into that approach? I mean, when I watched the videos, it made me want to go out and, do something similar. And are you continuing similar trends as your athletes get older? It's just progressing in maybe different movements. So
yeah, so I had a really great phys ed teacher when I was a kid, and we did he actually had two of them. One of them was a football coach and a track coach, and the other one was a kind of classical gymnast and sort of got into track and field later on. So when I was very young, we were in our classes we were exposed to doing putting two ropes down and doing things like long jump, and we had gymnastics mats where we taught us how to roll, and we played lots of games like my old gym teacher used to tell us that tag was one of the not only was it fun, but it was just such a great game to be able to develop the skills, because he was a football guy, to develop the skills to tackle. So that's all he was really thinking about was in 10 years I'm going to have these third graders and they're going to be playing football for me, and so I'm going to start to implement these things now. But really it came from being exposed to those things when I was a kid, and then being at home. I was the youngest of 5 boys, and so we used to literally set up like high jump pits in my upstairs house with mattresses and a stick. And I used to go to my brother's track meets and see hurdles and things like that. And I'd set up with the lawn chairs, I'd set up hurdle races and obstacle courses for myself. and some of the kids in the neighborhood would do that stuff. So really, I grew up with it, and I then later on, obviously as an athlete, got into strength and conditioning and that stuff, and that was really like my passion for a while. But then when I started to have children, I went back and started reading, like, what can I do with my kids as they get older? And I started reading, different gymnastics and phys ed books and things like that. And that's where I really started taking a deep dive. And I started to basically, everything I learned and saw, I started to just basically use my kids as guinea pigs and implement those things on them. And that's kind of how my youth program started, was with my oldest son. And then, one of his friends came and another friend came, and then my younger son joined in. And before you know it, you got 10, 12, 20 kids that are trying to join the program. And then I just started sort of like that. I got a real kick out of it. So I started filming those things, when we were doing it, because I didn't see anyone else doing those things at the time. And so as the programs progressed and sort of taken on a little bit of structure, I've tried to take those things that we do with the younger athletes and sort of implement them with the older athletes almost in their warm-ups. So if they have any developmental holes, if I have maybe an 8th grader, a 9th grader, 10th grader that's never learned how to do a forward roll, or never learned how to crawl, or never did any little type of climbing exercises, we'll put those things in their warm-up period, with the idea that maybe we can provide them some sort of like a little bit more development to go on top of like the typical strength conditioning things that they do. The other thing is when I was a strength and conditioning coach in college, I started getting really bored. Like I really hated like the progressions, like, oh, we're going to do side planks for 3 weeks, and then we're going to add this for 3 weeks. Like I started getting really, because you're with these athletes all the time and you're with them for years and years and years. And I felt like, let's just have more fun in our warm-ups, skipping and hopping and bouncing on one leg, and let's start getting on the floor. And instead of doing, dead bugs and these traditional like progressions, let's do rolling, and let's mix it up every day, and let's challenge you guys, and let you guys take over sometime, and let's try this, or, and I feel like it made training the athletes, it was a lot less monotonous for me, and it was a lot more fun for them. Because some days, like, they were coming in after a 2-hour practice, they just ran, there's one day the girls lacrosse team ran, 21 10s. And the last thing those guys want to do, especially after practice, after running those and being at a very highly academic school, I'm the last guy they want to see, literally the last guy they want to see, but they have to go do that thing. So I try to make their sessions a little bit more bearable and enjoyable, so they would want to come in and do those things after practice. So, and I know it's like the college level, we got to be serious and train hard, and but they just did train hard. They just ran 21 10s. So let's take a step back and maybe do some kind of lighten the mood a little bit, do some things they enjoy, and then we'll get in and do our strength training and things like that, and go from there. So yeah, I really started, my childhood was a big part of it, and then obviously having children was a huge part of it that kind of set it all in motion, and kind of been just going from there.
Love that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jeremy, when you were speaking there, I think it's becoming more and more common. And Mike and myself both have some experience in collegiate strength conditioning. I think you're seeing a lot more videos and just, in conversations with colleagues, more and more strength conditioning coaches that have shifted towards that type of model, especially in the basketball world. Like, you're already getting athletes that are so genetically gifted, yet Lee, you spoke about some of the AAU issues. You're seeing a lot of underdeveloped motor patterns. So I know for me, at least, I learned a lot from Coach Roos when he was at the University of Texas and now at VCU. But one of the first things we did always was put the gymnastics mat, or go find a gymnastics mat and get it in the weight room, or get it, courtside. So appreciate you sharing that.
You bet.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that definitely stuck out was your youth experience as a kid, and how creative we are as kids just to have fun and move. And then for some reason, it just slowly dwindles away as we age. And Lee, from your perspective, in your videos that we see posted as well, you let athletes just be athletes and let external objects and competition foster that intent. Could you touch on this and some of the techniques that you like to use with your athletes?
Sure. Yeah. I think that one of the main reasons I do that is I'm trying to find their innate underpinning as to why they move the way they do. That's my greatest assessment tool, rather than a formal, can you touch your toe? Can you, raise your opposite leg? And can you do that stuff, which has value because that has, mobility or neural drive, techniques that it can show us. But when I get an athlete to move based on a constraint or a restriction that I give them, maybe that they got to work around in that particular environment, or give them a task that they have to go through using a particular, maybe a Z ball, or which is like an agility ball, or a low box I like to use and have kids manipulate different movements and stuff. Or like Jeremy talked about tag. Tag is one of the greatest activities to drive all forms of movement and thought processes. And as we learn, and like the four of us, if we play tag often, within about a week to 2 weeks, we would know the types of move that each one of us go to. What's your go-to move? Barry Sanders was going to do a glide step, right? He's going to hit that glide step and then he's going to shimmy out of that. You know it's coming. You're still not going to stop him, but at least you know it's coming, so you don't look as bad. So those innate underpinnings that these kids show us, we can either look at that as a low functioning pattern, not a dysfunctional, but low functioning, or we can look at it as a high functioning pattern and we can embrace it and build upon that. If it's a low functioning pattern and we continually see it through these innate movements that they just randomly go to, now we can start to say, okay, every time Jeremy goes to his left, he gets stuck a little bit, but man, he's quick off his right. And Mike has a hard time opening his hips going to his left, or, Gabe's arm action gets him in trouble on acceleration. And we see it every time we add a new skill set. What a great way to assess. I mean, it really is, because we're not asking them to do anything but be themselves. And they're showing us. I've always said this, the nervous system drops clues. The problem is the way our industry or our profession is designed, it's not designed to pick the clues up, because we have protocols that we follow. And just like Jeremy said, let's do planks for 3 weeks, and then we'll do planks and scratch our ear for 3 weeks, and then we'll, we follow that, rather than saying, no, that's not what they're showing us. This is what they need, because they keep showing us they lack strength or stability or mobility in this issue. Let's go get that, because they're dynamically showing us. So that's the reason I like to do that. And then the implement, sometimes I literally make the implement up that moment. I'm like, okay, let's try a PVC pipe and see if we can hold it up and drop it and see who can catch it before it hits that, something like that. Just random things that kind of keep me motivated, but also get the athletes involved. And a lot of times I let the athletes choose, what do we want to do today? What's the tool we're using today? So that was a big tactic for me in phys ed. When I was a phys ed teacher, I'm like, if the kids knew they had a little bit of involvement in choosing what we're doing, the discipline problems went down, the excitement went up, and the involvement went up.
I think that's fantastic. Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, like that buy-in factor is there now. So like letting the athlete kind of take ownership for picking an activity or an object, they're more suited to then follow suit the rest of the training session per se. Would you agree with that?
100%. And going back to what Jeremy said earlier about sitting in a classroom all day and being dictated to, we now have given them what their neural drive and their system wants. It's choice. It's opportunity to have a voice and have a say. And so immediately that's like, what? I don't have to sit here and listen and be told to be quiet while somebody lectures to me for 3-4 minutes on a drill. I actually get to have a choice in what we're going to do, and that's it. And I think one of the greatest skills we can give these kids not only is giving them choice, but giving them the ability to teach others. So when a kid can help their peer in a like like, let's say an exercise Jeremy has him do going over the mat and the kid keeps struggling. And if their peers get to help them, say, hey, plant your hands like this when you swing your leg over. Try that. What a valuable tool to improve esteem and motivation, because now you're helping somebody else. That sometimes is more powerful than helping yourself.
You know, it's interesting watching too, like Lee, you've probably seen this with younger kids, is like if I put an implement out or some type of like activity, the different ways each kid approaches how to do that activity.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
especially like we do like vaults, you know, and so, you know, you might have a real athletic kid who can just launch his body right over, but then you have maybe a shorter kid who's trying to vaulting over this mat and he needs to put his foot up and then swing his under leg through. And you might have a kid who like just gets up and climbs over, you know, so they're all at different levels of development. And so they're all trying to problem solve at the same time, and they're all trying to problem solve in their own way. You know what I mean? And so you can see the different levels of development. And then over time, if you work with those kids enough, you see them progress, and as their body grows and they get a little bit stronger and more mature and things like that. So that's one of my favorite things, just to sit and watch. And I'm just like, I'll put something out for them to do, and all the different ways they come up with doing those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I imagine you also see with that level of buy-in, right, with the athletes when they're able to decide and pick things as well.
Oh, all the time. And especially like, I mean, every day it's like, can we do this that we did then? You know what I mean? Like, oh, remember that game we played last year? Like, can we do that game? There's always like something that they really love that they want to do. And so sometimes, you know, I've had a session planned, and then a kid comes in and is like, one kid wanted to play tag, the other kid wanted to play, you know, do jumps over the mat. And then so I'll be like, all right, so you want to do this, you do that. And then that's our session for the day. We hit all those things that each kid wanted to do. You know what I mean? So, you know, maybe we'll spend 10 minutes on each activity, and then that equals out to 60 minutes. You know what I mean? And so every kid got kind of to do something they liked, but they also did something the other kids liked as well, which is nice. And then the other thing I was going to talk about is when we play a game called Team Tag, which I really love because we get kids, you know, I separate the kids who are really athletic and put them kids with maybe are not as athletic.
Yeah.
And what you get is like these kids who are really athletic become kind of protectors. You know, they're not going to let the other kids from the other team take down their kind of less developed players. You know what I mean? I love that type of teamwork. You know, like we had a kid who's just a shark. You know, he's just better than everyone, and he like would go out of his way to make sure one of the kids on his team would win, who was not as athletic. He just basically run everyone down or protect that kid until it was the end of the game, and like that kid was the last one standing. It was great. You know, I love that type of stuff because you know, it just shows like just great teamwork and, you know, having empathy. The kid knows he's better than everyone else, but he's going to take the time and make sure someone else wins, which I love, you know.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great way to tie in some of the things we talked about earlier with the psychosocial aspect of it. For both having a kid be there who's not as athletic and potentially less confident, having individuals around there in the group setting that are willing to look after them, and also understanding, right, the more athletic individual being able to understand, like, yeah, I have to be a protector for a teammate in this instance. And that's really great. So thank you for sharing that. And Lee, going back to a little bit of the nervous system that you were talking about, and how our system the traditional system is set up to kind of inhibit that. I always really enjoyed, I think one of the first things you do at a conference or a clinic is like get the tennis balls out, right? People are talking about drop step or false step, and you're like, hey, all right, I want everyone to line up behind this individual. I'm going to drop this tennis ball and watch their feet. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then maybe some of the games that you like to do with individuals and the parameters, to be able to manipulate parameters to then create those, like, I think of the box drill, right? You have it very confined and small, and then you start to make it bigger, or vice versa. Can you talk a little about those drills?
Yeah, for sure. So back when I was in college, I played basketball in college, and I can remember one preseason conditioning. We had a coach that would, you know, put us on the baseline and blow the whistle, and you got to run the court, and we would take off because we always had to start in a defensive stance, athletic stance. We'd take off and he'd blow the whistle after a couple steps. No, go back, do it again. You guys did it wrong. You're all, you know, you stepped backwards. And so we did it again. And I was a captain. So after like the second time, he blew the whistle, and I said, Coach, what do you mean? We're stepping backwards. He goes, you guys take off and you're doing a false step. And I played football, so I knew what he meant. by false step, but I didn't feel myself stepping backwards. It wasn't like a thoughtful process of moving my center of mass back. So anyway, that back then, this was about 1987, 1986, I started watching more film. And I noticed I watched myself because I'm thinking, okay, if this is how I got to see it. And I noticed my feet consistently repositioned, and we have different names like a plyo step, which is behind the frontal plane, or a hip turn is in front of it, or directional, so whatever. And I noticed Michael Jordan did it. You know, my 7th grade kids in phys ed did it. Gail Sayers, who played at a time, didn't have guys like us, did it. So I'm thinking, okay, and this is what I'm talking about, where the nervous system drops clues. I just picked the clues up. I said, all right, that's obviously what we're trying to do. Then I started to learn about kind of the fight and flight response, the sympathetic nervous system, protecting ourselves, escaping danger, or attacking. And that's what happens. And it happens for many reasons, you know, none less important than the elasticity or the reactivity of that movement. It allows us to be quicker and use stored energy to move. To a young kid, they don't care about that. They just know having their feet glued to the ground isn't good, you know, when they're trying to be quick. So those repositioning steps are what our central nervous system gave us to protect ourselves. That's an escape or an attacking strategy to be able to get somewhere. Now, if we use it in sports, which isn't usually life or death, unless some phys ed classes you see, it could be life or death, depending on who's in the class, right? But we want to let the kids react and move freely. When we take that away from them and tell them they can't, you're actually inhibiting the body's best strategy to move quickly, to put it, you know, simply. And so we don't want to allow that to happen. Now, you mentioned those box drills or various drills where maybe you point at a cone, or you do this or that, and the kid has to react and move, which I would call either a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3, depending on what the movements are involved. When we start doing that, we can actually control the movements we want. So let's say we did a 5x5 box, and I put the athlete right in the middle, and I wanted to really work on them disassociating their hips and retreating back. Let's think of a middle linebacker having to drop back into a zone, you know, or a basketball player having to open their hips. I can now control that, but it's still random in that controlled environment. And then I can open it up and say, okay, now you can either go to any 4 of these cones. Now it's a little bit more random. Then we can take those away and we can play tag, or we can play, I can toss a ball, and now they got to go chase the ball. So taking a controlled box setting, or 2 cones, just put 2 cones out, got to go right or you got to go left. That's a tier 2. You don't know which one till I point, but their movement is very specific at that level. Then I start adding variety by putting more cones, maybe a triangle. Then I add the 4th box, and I can actually add correctives to that. So I can say, hey, this athlete really has a hard time pushing quick off that left side. No medical issue there, no sprains, nothing. They're just maybe not as coordinated because they don't do it enough. So now I can drive that pattern. So that's how it feeds us into being able to take this random movement, but controlling it enough to get a correction out of it. So that's kind of how we can add it. And then eventually you can go to the Z ball, which allows them to just read and react and move from there. And I've always talked to my athletes about the greatest skill that you can develop is reading. The ability to read what's happening and make a quick planned decision to go get that. Because once we do that, now the hip turn, the plyo step, all that just becomes the vehicle or the conduit to get you to finish that particular task. That's the thing. So it's like a sub skill of the major skill. Like I might quickly reposition, but what do I do after that to go get the drop shot or to go get the bunt? What's the skill? It's probably acceleration. So that's how we can kind of work those random drills from a little bit more controlled setting into pretty vast patterns.
Yeah, great commentary. Thank you. And I always appreciate your posts on anything related to baseball and base stealing and kind of the argument. I can remember when I remember so vividly being like 11 years old and having my baseball coach, here, teach me how to steal a base. And like, you got to swing, your left leg over your right leg. And that's the first thing that has to move. And then, you see videos of Billy Hamilton and Ricky Henderson and see some of the things that you're sharing. I'm like, and I was pretty good at stealing bases, I like to think, but I was like, it doesn't make sense in my head. So thank you for that. And this question is for Jeremy. When you're in the process of bringing in new athletes to train, how do you educate the parents or sport coaches on what you're doing, and how do you get them on board with the long-term approach to the training and saying, hey, this may not look like the other training that other programs do, and this may be a better approach than playing one specific sport year round? Because I imagine you hear some of that.
Yeah, I get a lot of that. I think what I get is, what a lot of times I get is some athletes come in with their parents, and they're sort of at this, I don't want to say crisis point, but almost like they were probably really good when they were younger, and now they hit a point when they're a little bit older, maybe starting to hit puberty. They've grown a little bit awkward, and all of a sudden, like, they're not as athletic, and they're not doing the things that they did when they were on the field, when they were younger, right? And so then they seek out. It's like, all right, well, the sport itself has sort of carried us far enough now. Oh, we look slow, so we're going to go find a guy who's going to help us get faster, right? And then I get those type of questions all the time. And so what I try to tell them is that we're going to do a bunch of general things. We're not going to. It may not look like, say, it's soccer. It's not going to look like soccer. It's not going to feel like soccer. But the activities we're going to do, we're going to try to build you up from the, we're going to try to improve your balance and improve your ability to stop and start. We're going to improve your strength. We're going to improve, like Lee was just saying, we do a lot of drills just the same, like being able to read a defender or offensive player, try to teach them what creating space is. Because, no one ever says that stuff, that when you're a kid, like how to create space or how to close space. But we try to teach them those things just so they have that idea in their head. And kind of give them a broad view of what athletic development kind of really is. Because I think when you do get those athletes who specialize in one sport, they don't realize that you can do a bunch of general things to help bring up your sport to get better. So I've seen it with my own kids too. Like, my oldest boy, when he was young, maybe 5th, 6th, 7th grade, he was playing lots of different sports and developing those skills, but sort of physically he wasn't there yet. So he looked pretty average, right? But then once he hit puberty and he found a weight room at the same time, which is a great time to really start to train when your body's growing at this rapid rate, and you start to like take on strength training and get serious, like you can almost double what what I could do right now, because the kid just gets stronger and so much faster, so quick. He was now able to express those skills that he developed when he was a kid so much more. And he went from looking like an average kid to above average athlete, because he's all of a sudden has the physical body to kind of use those skills that he has. And so those are the conversations that I have with the parents, is that we just need to get them, I go back to the phys ed side. Some of them look like I'm going to tell you right now, there's some parents that look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them, like, we're going to be crawling on the ground, and I'm like, let's take your daughter right now and see how long she can hang on a bar. And it, sometimes 10 seconds tops, 15 seconds, like they should have the structural integrity and the strength in their hands and their shoulders to be able to hang on a bar longer than that. Right. So I try to show them these different exercises and how these general movements and general skills will kind of build a better foundation for them for them to excel and go to a higher level at their particular sport. Luckily in this town, like I'm in a small town, in our high school, like all my kids play 3 sports, and a lot of their friends play at least 2, is because our school wouldn't be able to survive. The sports program wouldn't survive unless we had multi-sport kids. You know what I mean? So I can tell you right now, most of our varsity football players are our best varsity basketball players. You know what I mean? So, we do get a fair amount of kids who play multiple sports. But one town over is a big school, lots of kids at the school, and almost, I can tell you, every kid there probably plays one sport, because if they don't put the time in to that sport, they're probably not going to make their team. So it's an interesting thing. And literally the schools are like maybe a mile and a half apart. But the size of the school dictates what kids can play, which is wild. And that's why I always told my kids, I think, the beauty of being in a small school is that you guys have just this great opportunity to do so much when you're younger. And you guys can be good at 3 sports rather than having to do one thing all the time. And who knows? Like, we don't know. Maybe you get to play in college, maybe you don't, but you're going to have a great time, growing up in this town and playing the sports in your high school.
Amen.
You mentioned hanging on the bar as kind of like a
Yep.
quick assessment to maybe create some buy-in from the parents or even the athlete. Is there anything else that you like to use almost like right off the bat as like a, hey, this is what we need to be working on?
Well, yeah, you can. I stole Joel Smith and Tommy John and like those guys. You put someone in like an isometric lunge, and you can tell pretty quickly like kind of what their level is. They start shaking, and 10 seconds in, they start shaking, leaning forward. They look at you like with these eyes, like, "What are you doing?" And their legs start burning. So it's silly things like that. But even like just like, I want you to stand on top of this box and balance on one leg. Touch the ball to the ground and bring it overhead 5 times without falling over. And most kids fall right over. I was working with a bunch of kids last night that were new. And we did that drill and almost every one of them fell off the box. It's a little short box. It's not big, but they could not stand on one foot for more than 10, 15 seconds. And then when you're asking them to kind of move on that one foot forward and back or side to side, they struggled. So, those are all clear signs to me that they probably do too much of their sport specific work and not enough general work.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And Lee, do you experience any pushback on your training? You've carved out a pretty big niche in speed and agility, and it seems like a lot of parents actually naturally understand the value of that. What kind of educating do you find yourself doing?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because first of all, I do a tremendous amount of strength training, even though that's not what gets promoted and stuff like that. But because I understood the value of a niche and being able to create awareness of that specific niche years ago. But I'm a huge fan of strength training. As like Jeremy talked earlier, strength training is a very diverse skill set, not just taking a bar or whatever. But anyway, the biggest issue that I run into with parents is like when parents pick up their kid, they're like, well, geez, they don't look like they were that tired. Or the kid said, yeah, it wasn't really that hard. I learned a lot. I moved really well. I did stuff, but it wasn't that hard. So my education process is getting them to understand if we're trying to enhance a skill, there's a certain level of energy they have to be able to have. And so if I'm constantly fatiguing them and they no longer can perform the skill the way we want, that's detrimental to what you brought them to me for, because you didn't bring them. Most people don't bring athletes to me, because they say, hey, they have to, be in better shape. It's like they're too slow. The coach says they can't defend very well, they can't move, or they can't jump very high, or they can't do this. So I'm like, okay, if that's the goal, then this is what we have to do. So that's my explaining that I routinely have to do. I had a dad a couple of weeks ago, I remember, dropped his son off and said, oh yeah, punish him, boy, make him work. And I'm like, sorry, you're going to be disappointed, because that's not what we're here for. It's and it's funny because he kind of laughed. I said, if that's what you wanted, you got a house. He can run around your house until you want him to stop. You don't have to bring him to me to do that. I said, if you want him to get faster, quicker, change directions better, that's what we're gonna develop here. So that's the big thing. And then going back to Jeremy's point, sometimes it doesn't look like what they expect it to look like. It doesn't look like Sunday afternoon NFL guy making this move. It looks kind of play-like. It looks kind of silly and messy. And I'm like, that's exactly what the brain needs. It needs that messiness to solve that problem. And that's more valuable than a restricted drill where they only do one thing. And they got to get used to it. So I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, hey, this is what we do. If you're not interested in it, that's okay. I'm not going to fight you anymore. I'm going to educate you, but I'm not going to fight you. And then we just move on. So it's, the battles are always going to be there, though.
I will say that like having implemented like a youth athletic development program years ago, I now have like a pretty good transition from
Yeah.
like the youth training into sort of more organized sort of training. So like basically when the kids hit around grade 6, 7, they kind of age out um of the youth type stuff. Not that they want to, they still like to do that stuff, but there's a lot of kids that see the older kids training and they start to hit a maturity level where they want to try that stuff. And so I've had a really good like transition with a lot of kids going from sort of one program to the next because they get a little bit older and then they're like, all right, well, I don't want to do these, things that the younger kids are doing today. I want to, I want to try some strength training or some sort of speed training, whatever it is, but they see the older kids do that stuff and they want to try it. And so that's kind of how we transition kids in from one program into the next, which has been really nice since the parents are already on board. The kids are already coming to the gym and they know it's a good thing. And that, just from like a movement and exercise standpoint, right? And then the kids get a little bit more serious and they want to continue on. And so they kind of move on to the next thing in our program.
And what's great about that, Jeremy and Mike and Gabe, is it's the closer you can get parents to understand the martial arts model, because that's the one physical model they don't question, that you have to go from a white belt to a yellow to eventually, if you go long enough, over 3+ years, to a black belt. But in our company or anybody's company, it's not uncommon for them to say, hey, my kid's got 5 weeks and they need to be a lot faster in 5 weeks. And I'm like, I can help a little bit, but there's too many factors in there. But if you give me 3-4 years, you'll have a really good moving athlete if you just are patient and go in. We don't have to explain that in martial arts, but we do have to explain that in our setting. And so I always try to tell people, if you can develop like a hat system or a color system or a t-shirt, you're a white shirt, then you go to, if you can do something like that to say, hey, you got to have these skill sets to be able to earn this. And it can be fun. It can, it could be, kind of some random stuff in there, but that's one way to keep them looped into it. Otherwise the 6-week program is what they want, and that's not at all what we want as long-term development professionals.
That's a good point. I've never thought of it like that, but like receiving something to show that, hey, you pushed on to the next level could be, super beneficial in our setting. You guys both touched on it as well. Excuse me. When athletes start with you guys and then transitioning into their next program, and then like youth are seeing the older kids do this, I'll start with Jeremy first, but this question is going to be for both you guys, is for your long-term athletes that you guys had for many years, what are the biggest changes that you guys notice in their development? It might not be physical, maybe it's more mental, they're more focused, psychological, or the way that they handle themselves. But from your perspective, over the course of those years, what do you guys start to see in your athletes?
I've seen it all. I've had kids who were real pain in the asses when they were like in 5th grade, and then they stayed with us, and by the time they were juniors, like they were super likable kids, and then you realize they were just young and energetic, and that's just all the whole part of growing up. At the time, you can say that you don't like this kid, or he's the behavior problem, but the reality is that that's the whole part of maturity and maturation, right? So I've had that. I've had kids, I can't tell you how many, kids that I had who were slow and chubby and unathletic, and boom, turn into, mountains of muscle and fast and strong, and went on to play college sports. It's happened so many times over the years, and it's fascinating when I see it happen. So I've seen that, and I can get emotionally. I can give you an example. One of our athletes is heading off to Rutgers next year to play field hockey, and she started training with us. And at the age of 10, she was already suffering from anxiety attacks, because she really loved field hockey, but she was playing a lot, playing in tournaments and things like that. And she found the weight room, and she told me, like, this is the place where I like realized, like, yeah, I can be anxious, but I have a place to go. And, when I get stronger and I put more weight on the bar or I work really hard, those feelings seem to go away. And so for her, this place has been a beacon of, it's been a huge help for her through her those years. No, especially those, for girls 10, 11, 12, 13, those can be some tough years for them. And, she expressed to me how much it's helped her not only become a better athlete, but just emotionally kind of being able to rein in those feelings that you have, anxiety and panic and things like that. So I've seen it all across the board, from physical to emotional to mental, you name it, behavioral, which is always the funniest one. So, and Lee, I'm sure you've seen it as well
Sure.
over the years. And one of the things I love too is when kids come back, and I've had tons of kids go away to college or grow up, or just even get an email or a message or a text, or someone's home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and they stop down just to say hi. That gives you a clue that you had some sort of impact on their life if they're taking the time out of their day to get in touch with you.
Just really quick before we go to you, Lee. Jeremy, with that said, what's like your favorite group to work with as far as age? Is it that, after college full circle, wow, we've really seen them develop? Or is it, I want to catch them right when they're young and then I can see them progress?
Yeah, I really loved working with the kids from basically like kindergarten. I have like one group of kids, it's like basically K through 2, and that's like, just like, hey, let's go. And they just go, if I set up an obstacle course or whatever. But then like that age group between like grades maybe 3 to 5, 3 to 6, those kids really start to love sports and they really get into like competition. So that's also a fun age as well. And they understand more, so you can throw more things at them. So I really love like that, those basically. And then the next transition is going into like junior high, that basically K through 8. I really love working, not that I don't love working with high school kids, that's awesome too. But I really love those transitional years, as I think like, if you get a hold of them at that time, the sky's the limit. You can do so much with them over that time period. And you can, like, I think Lee said something earlier about developmental windows. That's the golden age. That basically that K through 8, you're going to see so many changes. And if you give them the right stuff at the right time, you're going to see huge benefits down the line.
That's awesome. Lee, over to you. Same thing. What are you noticing throughout your athletes that are transitioning from year to year, and then your favorite age group as well?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, I don't have to touch on much because Jeremy hit it perfectly with the emotional stuff. That's so fun to see develop. It really is. The one thing that I always enjoyed, if I have athletes, so back when I had my original speed academies in New York, there wasn't a lot of competition because we didn't have a ton of like travel sports. It was starting to come in, but it wasn't that big, and there wasn't a lot of other people doing kind of what we do now. So it wasn't uncommon to get kids 3-4 days a week for years and years. I had a couple athletes, 14, 15 years, right from young kids right up through college, and a couple of them played professional, and I had them right through that time. So I got to see a lot. But what I really enjoyed to see is when they start to understand movement and they start to become more patient when we're doing an exercise or a specific drill or a skill set. They start to understand pace better. Sometimes we'll be doing an exercise and the athlete that are younger go 100 miles an hour, but they're like a train wreck at every turn, and then they eventually understand a little bit of pace, a little bit of deceleration early enough to set up the change of direction is really the magic. And I can tell them that, but until they feel it and go through it, they don't get it. So I loved watching. In my head right now, I got a specific athlete that I worked with for years in New York. And I can remember when she came in and we got her introduced to all the different stuff we did. And it took time over the years and stuff. She ended up going on to one of the military academies in college. And it was a very, very good athlete. But when she first came in, it was like, she's bouncing off this wall and this wall and just out of control. But it was trying to please me or the coaches, trying to, go as hard as she can. And I said, Sometimes pace is really important, setting a move up, corralling an athlete, setting an athlete up to think you're going to go one way and then going another way, because we did a lot of scenarios like that. And to see them mature through that program, you know, if you look at some of the best running backs, they're patient. They allow the block to occur, then they explode. The rookie runs right into his blockers, right? Runs right up their pack. He's not patient, or he runs around the block. So same thing in basketball. You get the kid who goes 100 miles an hour. Doesn't have any pace. That's what I enjoy seeing, the development. And again, everything Jeremy talked about was so critical and important, but he nailed that. There's no need for me to sell. This kind of stuff was fun for me to watch as well. And when you start talking about groups, because I was a phys ed teacher as well, and I had K through 12, so you pretty much hit them all. Then I obviously trained the postgraduate type athletes. I always have a problem with this, because I love when I'm with each group. And like Jeremy said, when I had my kindergarten through your primary grades, and then you get your, 3 through 4, and then 5 through 8 or whatever, each one kind of brings something out in me, because it's a new challenge, it's a new skill set, new energy. Like Jeremy said, the young kids are so fun, because all you got to do is point, go, and they're gone. They're like those cars you roll back until the wheels get energy, boom, you let them go. They're so fun. And then the older kids, yeah, they come in with a little bit of an attitude. I'm too cool to do that, until you start doing it. And then they love it. And I love that transition. So I can't really pick a group, sorry, but I love each one that I'm with. The only thing I would say, when we start talking about the highest levels, I had a difficult time, and I worked with many different professional level athletes in different sports. Sometimes they can be very inconsiderate of the process and what we have to do. That's probably what drove me out of that population most, because I was heading in that way. I was working with a lot of professional athletes way back in the early 90s. And I got tired of that. That's the only thing. The exuberance of young kids is what attracted me to to that process of long-term development.
Yeah, I'm glad both of you have found your way into that process of long-term development. As obviously we appreciate having you on and seeing a lot of the resources that you both share. And I imagine this is a question for both of you. I imagine you get this from a lot of friends and family, and especially probably new parents that they say, hey, I want my kid to be the best athlete possible. And they know who you are, right? They know your experience as a coach, and they know your influence in the developmental world. They say, I want my kid to be the best athlete possible. What do you think they should do? And it could be training related. It could be, which sport should they play? What is your typical answer for that question? I'm going to start with Jeremy, then go to Lee.
I always tell them, especially if they're really young, I meet parents that maybe have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, and I tell them all the time, the first thing you should do is put them on the ground and let them figure out how to crawl and roll and get up and move around. Right. So that's the first thing. You're literally just by doing that, the infant is going to figure out how to navigate its world. Right. And that's like literally step one. And honestly, there's a lot of kids that you see uncoordinated these days that weren't allowed to do those things when they were like really, really young. They were held too much, or, put in jumpers, or, all those things. Like they just didn't get that early exposure. The other thing I tell, play with your kids, constantly play with your kids, wrestle with them, throw them up, throw them on the bed, flip them upside down, like all that type of activity and movement is just like, it's like candy for their brain and their body. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just, they love it. They seek out that stuff. You know what I mean? And it develops so many things, eyes, ears, strength, you name it, balance. So when they're young, wrestling with them and doing rough and tumble play is probably one of the most important things you can do. And then when they do get a little bit older, going outside, chase them, right? Kids love to be chased, love it. And you'll see, like, it's amazing, right? Lee talking about some of the steps that humans naturally have. You can see them do a plyo step, or a side step, or change direction really quickly when they're like 2 years old. They just do it because we're humans. You know what I mean? And so by doing it to them when they're young and exposing them over and over and over again, they develop those skills faster in a time period when their bodies want to do those things, right? So we spent obviously I'm just playing with my kids and we're just having fun, but you're also, developing those athletic skills or coordination skills that they can use not only in sports, but for the rest of their life. So, all the way up until from when they're born until, they get into middle school or whatever, when they don't think you're that cool anymore. Play with your kids as much as possible. I think that's really, really where you bring them everywhere, bring them to the park to play pickup hoops, bring them to the playground to climb on the jungle gyms. There's lots of, my program, there's parkour now, you can get kids involved in, simple gymnastics programs, things like that. But any type of like full body activity that's like full body movement that allows them to jump and run and tumble and roll and things like that, that's setting up a great foundation for athletic development and sports for later on.
Yeah, my brother has a 1-year-old now, so I'm just going to tell him, you know what? If you want to know what the best thing to do is, just listen to the K.E.S. with Jeremy Frisch and Lee Taft.
Right, yeah.
And you'll know what to do. How about you, Lee? When you get that question, how do you answer it?
Yeah, definitely. So if we're going to start talking about the kids that once they've reached that stage where they can start running and moving and playing a little bit, what I always try to tell them, first of all, because we did this with our kids, when they're young, the different sports evolve the kids' coordination patterns, skill sets, tracing skills, tracking skills, and all. So youth soccer is critical for moving the body to get the feet in position to make a play. Most sports move the body to get the hands in position to make a play. So we want to develop that skill set. Soccer is great at it. It puts them on one leg, reaching with the opposite leg. That's a great coordination pattern that will serve them really well. Then we had a thing in our area called Ninja Zone. Ninja Zone is parkour, climbing, gymnastics, a little bit of, kind of real basic martial art stuff. Not that they did any combative stuff, but it had everything you can imagine. And my son went through that for a while. My daughters did gymnastics. Those develop manipulative skills of their body. Strength skills that are lifelong skills like grip. Grip is associated with life, how long we live. The ability to get up off the ground, also a skill that makes us survive longer. So those are all really important. Then I'm a big fan of getting into something like tennis, pickleball, badminton, racquetball, anything where they have to manipulate an implement that is many inches to feet outside the width of their hand. That's a very important tracking skill that kids need to be able to develop, and it helps them a lot. And I love baseball, softball, but when they're young, they get more opportunities quickly with tennis or racquetball or soccer, racquetball or pickleball, because it comes back and forth quicker. Baseball, softball, sometimes, it pitches, you got to get it back, you got to reset and you go. And the kids don't have the patience. But tennis, you can get it very, very quickly, and you can use the soft foam ball. So that's a big one I'll push them on. I don't care if they play tennis, but I think they should be exposed to it. And then obviously, I think they should get involved in some kind of track program, because, and I'm not saying even for the distance running and all that, but just for the sprinting, learning how to jump into a pit, learning how to do all the, mini hurdles, good track programs, youth track programs use appropriate equipment, and they learn that maximal intensity of sprinting at a young age, and it should be appropriate distances. They don't have to sprint 100 meters. They could go 40 meters, right? They could go 60 depending on their age. And I think if you hit those 4 main areas, plus all the others like basketball, I'm huge, and all these sports, volleyball is a really good manipulative skill. I think what you do now as the athlete grows and gets into freshman, sophomore, and says, I really like these 2 sports. I like to play tennis with my friends, but I don't want to play for the team. That's fine. But they now have that skill set, and now they become a parent armed with a knowledge that's going to be valuable to help their kids. And we specialize kids. They can't help a kid how to play baseball or softball if they never picked up a bat or never threw or never caught it, because we don't get it anymore in phys ed like we used to. So that's what I would do. I try to get them on those. That's what I always encourage parents. Oh, sorry. I hit my hand hit my thing. There's coordination right there for you. I just ripped my earlobes off. So those are the skill sets that I like to have developed in a natural sport, and those different sports help that.
Lee, you're gonna love this story. When I was a kid, we had a park probably 50 yards from my house, tennis court, double tennis court, and we had like a WWF belt that we had in the neighborhood, and we played tennis. All the kids would play tennis, and if you won for the day, you got to take home the belt, and you were like, you were champion of the neighborhood. And
That's awesome.
and we did it and actually the older kids had set it up. It was the older kids that actually started it, but it like trickled down, and they sort of got bored of playing, and it got passed on to us, the younger kids. And so it was like sort of like this generational thing where like once one kind of group got bored with it and did something else, we'd give it to the other kids. But like it was great. Like I'd come home and I have my championship belt because I won tennis for the day. And we had so much fun. And I can tell you though, like out of the group of kids, all of us in the neighborhood, like I fell into football and stuff like that, but we actually had a kid who stuck with it and ended up playing tennis and tennis in high school, and then he became a tennis pro and teaches today, which is awesome. Pretty cool. Yeah, so pretty funny. I love having that belt.
Yep.
Does the belt still exist? Is it still being passed down to this day?
No, you know what? They unfortunately they took out the tennis court and put it in a water park for the kids. Yeah, they did a number on that park. It used to be great. We had lights, and we had it was another thing too, is like the playground there was set up in a way that like each activity, so like the jungle gym was over in one part of the park, and then in order to get like to the swing, you had to run 20 yards to the next part of the park, and then to get to the slide it was another 20 yards. So it was like this big circle, like a circuit. So when you wanted to play on those implements, you had to run to each one. And now these parks, if you see in playgrounds, there's just like this one like big mass stupid thing that's super safe, and the kids can't fall off. And the slide, whenever you see kids going up a slide, they're bored to death of going down it, right? So like the parks today are just not what they used to be. But yeah, it was like the playground was set up, and there was a basketball court, and there was a tennis court. And so every day there would be kids from high school kids playing hoops to adults playing tennis to kids running around the park. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, they decided to like everything else, it's too much of a liability, and now it's a splash pad, which is fun for a 2-year-old for about 10 minutes, and then it's about it. So
all right, here's a little bit of a fun question real quick. I'm curious to hear you guys answer, because when you ask strength and conditioning focus like equipment, it's always like barbell, kettlebell. But from your guys' perspective, if you had 3 to 4 pieces of favorite equipment used at the youth athletic development level, what would you pick and why? Lee, we'll go to you first.
All right. Well, I'm a fan of like tennis balls, Z balls, because of all the things you can do with them, manipulating the athlete's movement. So I like those types of things. Now, I'm also a fan of any kind of, we used to call them a buck. Okay. Jeremy uses mats. He sets up and they do like a hand plant or a sit through or something like that with a mat. We used to have it was a buck. It looked like a big loaf of bread, right? But it was pretty big. And you could do stuff. Those were when I taught phys ed, even if I was doing a different unit, a lot of times I would use that as a warm-up implement. And I think those are great. When I had my facilities, I didn't have a buck, but we used boxes like Jeremy did, and we'd vault over, because I think that's a fabulous skill to do. And then, I would say probably something like depending on the age of the athlete. I know the agility ladder gets poo-pooed a lot by people, but when you understand its value and what it can do for especially young kids, and all the different skills you can do on it, from hands to feet to balance to reactive games we use on it and stuff, I think that's a safe, quick tool that can transport. Because if I use a Z ball out on a football field, it doesn't work. But I can use a ladder anywhere I want. I can pull a ladder out, and I can do a lot of stuff with different kids, different ages, even adults. I can do stuff with them. And I know it's not, people say, well, it doesn't teach speed. Well, no kidding. All right, holding a dumbbell in my right hand doesn't teach speed either, but it has value. It says something, right? So we just have to understand what it is. So those would be the things that I kind of have. I'm very simple, very, very simple. I use cones, medicine balls, bands, and Z-balls, and that's it. I don't use a lot of stuff.
Love it. Thanks, Lee. And real quick, before we transition over to Jeremy, Lee, it was mentioned in the chat by one of the participants about getting a link to the multinational study. So for the research, so if we were able to grab that, we can blast it out. That'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't have a link because I got that study, gosh, 20 years ago or so, and it was Loganborough University study on movement and learning. That's what it was, and I had it. It was a hard copy. I never had a link to it, but if you type in Loganborough University in the UK, and that it might be able to pop up, and I'll see if I can find it and get it to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much,
Yep.
Jeremy. Over to you for 3 to 4 pieces of favorite equipment.
I probably use every day. I probably use a pool noodle extensively. They're soft and they're light implements, and so like a lot of times we'll use them where like I swing it at a kid, and when I swing it high, he's gonna duck, or if I swing it low, he's gonna jump over it, so we can do some kind of reactive movement type stuff. And so and then you can use it as we use it for tag. We cut them in half and use them for tag, so the kids have a little bit more reach and extension. So I probably use those quite a bit. Crash mat is a huge one. I have a big one that like you can't move anywhere, but I have a smaller one that's about 6 by 6 that I can stuff in my car. I can take it outside and do that. So it's just it's a nice implement to allow kids to land, soft space to land and do different types of like rolls or dives or front handsprings and things like that, because we do a lot of those things here. And the kids love to I'll throw a football and they dive and catch, and so you can practice in the air and kind of manipulate your body a little bit and not have to worry about hitting the ground really hard. And then obviously when they get older, on a football field or something like that, they don't really care. That's all part of the game. But when they're younger, you can practice those skills and not worry about hitting the ground hard and getting hurt, etc. So that's probably my other big one. Just like Lee, tennis balls are huge. We throw them off the wall just to, throw them in the air to catch, bounce them off the ground to catch, bounce it, try to catch it at its highest point or on its way down. We use them to do sprints where I throw them and the kids chase them down. I'll try to catch them on one bounce. I'll roll them at the wall and the kids have to beat. Basically, we have a crash mat up against the wall, and so I'll roll the tennis ball and they race the ball and try to get to the wall before the ball does, or they have to like dive and stop the tennis ball from hitting the wall. And so that's always a huge hit. Because the kids, if the mat and the ground is soft enough, those kids will sell out. They'll go for it. They'll dive. They'll do anything they can to stop that ball from hitting the wall. So tennis balls are always huge. Gator skin balls, because we play some dodgeball. Or do different drills where maybe some base, like we play pickle a lot, where the kids have to run back and forth between bases and not get hit by the ball. So the gator skins really come in handy there, because not only are they soft if you get hit, but they're easy to catch with like younger kids, things like that. And I love it because I can fire the ball as hard as I can and not have to worry about, especially with my own kids, I have to worry about them getting hurt, and I can just unleash it on them. So, and they love that stuff. They want you to go hard. They want a challenge. So it's really fun when the high school kids will basically jump in and do some of the stuff with the younger kids. So I would say pool noodle, crash mat, tennis ball, and gator skin balls are kind of my go-tos. You'll always probably find those things in my car. If I ever do stuff outside or summertime, you'll find all those type of things in my car to do any activities outside. When the warm weather's here.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great answers. I love the pool noodles. I remember I stole that from Nick Sestautis at UIC, called them ninja swords, which was a great name for it too, because the kids love it immediately if it's called ninja swords. Like, who doesn't want to be a ninja? But I remember we use it as a warm up for our basketball practice. You guys talked a little bit earlier about the monotony of kind of training and warm ups, and we use that for a warm up. And our head sport coach was like, "What are you doing with the guys?" And then 10 minutes later, he's got his phone out recording it, being like, I got to send this to all the other sport coaches. I love this. Then the next day it's like, hey, can we do ninja swords again for the warm up? Like, so, you know, you guys are laughing along with, I'm sure you've had a similar experience. So the pool noodle is a huge one. And that's a great one. So shout out Nick Zestautis for that. So last question we have for you today. We want to be respectful of your time today. It's something we like to ask all of our panelists that join us on the K.E.S, but start with Jeremy, and then we'll go to Lee to finish up. What does your own training look like right now? Like, Jeremy, are you diving on the ground too? Are you rolling around and crawling, and what does your training look like? Is it something specific, or are you experimenting constantly?
Yeah, I usually just kind of do what I want. I train, you know, as a college athlete, I was really into strength and conditioning and lifting heavy weights and power cleans and Olympic lifts when I played. But, you know, over time, that stuff beats you up too. As much as it does improve your performance, there's a kind of eventually there's a drop off on your body, and it can kind of beat you up. So I don't do that stuff as much anymore. I definitely spend maybe a couple days a week, my first 10-15 minutes of a warm up, I'll crawl on the ground, I'll roll, I'll do forward rolls, backwards rolls. I practice handstands, I climb on the bars and hang, you know, try to shimmy right and left, try to hang from one hand, which I'm terrible at. But I definitely do those things still. At least a couple days a week. And I usually alternate, although I don't like it, I feel it for whatever reason, like going for like a 20-minute jog, 25-minute jog, just up top, just makes you feel good. Doesn't always make my body feel great, but if I move around after and stretch and do some things, I usually feel good. So I usually get a couple of days of sort of a long distance run, and then I'll alternate those days with like maybe a sprint session. You know, one of my knees kind of bugs me a little bit. So running uphill seems to feel better than running on the flat ground. So I'll do some hill sprints. You know, whenever the kids are down here, I'll jump in a game. We'll play dodgeball or pickle or whatever, and I'll do that stuff. And then when it comes to strength training, I do a lot of isometric push-up, lunge. I love chin-ups. I do a lot of like chin-ups and stuff on the rings where you can flip over and do different things like that, just to mix it up. And you know, I literally do like a push, a pull, some type of single leg work maybe, and some type of work for like my hamstrings, like a glute ham or a kettlebell swing. It's literally that simple. And I just try to do something every day, stay active and move. So I wish I had this really big time training program, but those days are long gone.
Yeah.
I pictured you looking like Vince Vaughn in old school, like on the rings, man. Still holding.
Oh yeah.
Lee, how about yourself? I know
Yeah.
you're demonstrating, you're putting a lot of videos out there, so that's got to count for something at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do the movement stuff. You know, I do my little quickness stuff, and I just so that I can continually do it. You know, I feel like as long as I'm still doing some of the movement and shuffles and change of directions and basic jumps and all. But in terms of strength training, I'm kind of like Jeremy, where I just kind of do what I feel. But what I try to do is every week is a new. So Jeremy mentioned pull. I'm a huge pull up, chin up, all different variations. I do those all the time. So one week I'm going to do a lot of body weight based stuff. So straps, pull ups, dips. You know, I've always, since I was a little kid, I've done dips and pull ups. So they never bothered me. I love them. And so I'll do, you know, single leg stuff, body weight squat. And then the next week I do all bars. Everything I do is with a full Olympic bar. So whether it's a squat, a strict press, you know, maybe a clean, bent over rows, you know, whatever, landmines, I do stuff only with a bar. And then the third week is my dumbbell routines or complexes or whatever. I'll do that stuff. Then I just keep rotating through. I do different things like that. And sometimes I'll mix those up a little bit, but that's kind of keeps me fresh. At my age right now, I just want to keep moving and, you know, and feel good and be able to demonstrate for my athletes, you know, and still feel good about it.
I was just sitting here looking at my wall of all my books and stuff, and I just found this little
goodness, that's
this little DVD right here for Lee.
That's one of the originals.
Groundbreaking athletic movement right here, sitting right in front of me.
That's about 20 years ago.
That's awesome.
Thank you. That's fun.
That's great. Well, you know, we really appreciate both of you being on here today. A big thank you to our attendees that join us live for the K.E.S. and a huge thank you to the both of you. Like I said, Jeremy Frisch and Lee Taft. These individuals are two of the best follows for long-term athletic development, and we really mean that. So please be sure to give them both a follow on social media. Jeremy, you can follow on Twitter at Jeremy Frisch and on Instagram at achieve_performance. His videos are the best. They really are. And if you ever have the chance to see him on your timeline, you know what we're talking about. And Lee, you can follow on both Twitter and Instagram at Lee Taft. He's putting out great content consistently, including at-home drills. Do yourself a favor, follow both of them right now. You will not be disappointed. You'll be very happy that you made that decision. So this discussion will be publicly available on the Keiser Fitness YouTube page, and the audio will be up on Spotify as well under Keiser Education Series. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see you in December.